Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Tuesday evening. And I'm very happy to speak to you about a subject dear to my heart, eliminating medication errors in competition horses. For those who don't know me, my name's Kevin Corley. I'm a specialist in internal medicine and equine critical care here on the Curragh in Ireland. And I am one of the founders of the company EquiTrace. The mission of EquiTrace is to bring horse identification and healthcare into the digital age. And I will talk to you a little bit about what we do in EquiTrace, but mainly I'm going to be talking to you about how we can reduce errors when we're medicating competition horses. So we've all seen the headlines, unfortunately, and this is just a sample of some of the many headlines that we've been facing. These headlines not only are damaging to the trainer involved, but they're also damaging to the vets involved, the owners, the jockey, and the sport we all love. They do no one any favors. And yet when we look at what's behind the headlines, often it's not people being malicious, it's not people trying to cheat. Often it's simply either ignorance or most commonly, simple human error. Unfortunately, often those get treated the same, and someone deliberately trying to cheat gets treated exactly the same way, either by the press or by the public, as simple human error. So how can we prevent this? Well, the black and white view is just not use drugs. Why don't we just ban all drugs in horses, or have super long withdrawal times for everything? And that would mean no horse would ever test positive, and that would solve this issue. But unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. As a vet, my prime concern is welfare. And there are many conditions which need treatment. A couple of examples here. Gastric ulcers. Gastric ulcers don't only occur in competition horses, 20 to 30% of feral horses have gastric ulcers. Gastric ulcers are painful. Treatment for gastric ulcers doesn't actually improve performance. It's been shown that there's no effect on performance of proton pump inhibitors. And yet we have to stop them 2 days or 62 hours prior to competition under Irish racing rules, 4 days under Nordic racing rules. And I know from my research that I did with Mike Murray, I helped Mike Murray with his research, and ulcers can form easily within 2 days. So unfortunately, we are, by trying to have clean competition, sometimes we are causing welfare issues for our horses. We all know Porrick Harrington had his knee injected a couple of times and has had a few joints injected, as I believe. Andy Murray had problems with his back. These are elite athletes. No one is suggesting that these guys are trying to cheat. They're getting injured, they're trying to get the injury solved, and then they're going back to competition. If you exercise in any way, you will get injured. Even if you don't get exercise, you can get injured. And it's in no one's interest, it's certainly not in the horse's welfare interest, not to provide treatment for injuries. So the dilemma comes, though, that if we try and ban all drugs or make super long withdrawal times for all drugs, we get a law of unintended consequences. We're doing it because we love horses and we're trying to protect the horse. But that slight injury, that mild colic that the horse has coming up to a competition, if you know that if you treat the horse, if you relieve that pain, you are going to have the horse out of that competition, possibly not qualify for the Olympics, then it's a huge issue, because there's two competing things there. The wish to compete the horse and the wish to look after the horse's welfare. And there is a push. You do try and push it. If you know that giving a painkiller for a very mild colic, say, or a mild muscle strain, the horse is in pain, it should receive an analgesic. But we're incentivizing people not to give that. The more stringent we make the rules. And so we're actually harming horse welfare. So what about the opposite? Hey, why don't we just allow therapeutic drugs, not performance enhancing drugs, but therapeutic drugs in competition horses? Well, unfortunately, life isn't that black and white either. So what happens is that painkillers can mask injury, or can allow a horse that has a subclinical injury to compete and injure itself. So this is data to back that up. This is a study that was looking at racehorses in Kentucky, and they were looking at horses that got injured in a race versus the winner of the race versus a random horse selected by the stewards, which they called special. And they looked at the plasma concentrations of phenylbutazone, which is a painkiller. And here you can see if a horse got injured during a race, it was more likely to have phenylbutazone on board than if it either won or was a random horse. And the same is true for the other non-steroidals. This is for flunixin, and this is for the non-steroidal naproxen, all of them painkillers. So painkillers can mask an injury and allow a horse to compete with a mild injury that then gets worse during the race. And that's not good for the horse's welfare either. It's not just Kentucky. Here's another study from last year where they looked at injuries and fatal injuries in thoroughbreds in Argentina. And it's whether the horse did or did not receive phenylbutazone prior to the race. And what you can see here is that horses that received phenylbutazone during the race were more likely to have musculoskeletal injuries during the race. And here, horses that received phenylbutazone before the race were more likely to have a fatal injury during the race. So we have a balancing act. On one side, we have the welfare of the horse, because we need to treat disease and injuries. And we need to not disincentivize people from providing pain relief and necessary treatment for horses when they need it. On the other side of this balancing act, we also have welfare of the horse, and we need to prevent injury during competition to protect the welfare of the horse. And in all cases, we also need fair competition. So this is what we're trying to achieve. And this is the gray area. You can argue where on the balance this should be, but we need to be somewhere on this balance. And what we need to try and achieve as a veterinary profession, as a sport, as all our different sports where we work with horses, are to allow necessary medication, but make sure it's not present or it's not active. And that's often a bit of debate at time of competition. So we need a balance here. How do we achieve that balance? Well, it's difficult, and there's not much information to help us achieve that balance. This is the information that is provided, and on the left here, we have the detection times provided by the European Horse Race Scientific Liaison Committee. It was last updated in March this year. Before that, it was a few years before it was updated. On the right, we have the detection times from the FEI, and that was last updated in 2018. However, these are detection times. And what this means is that they did an experiment. They measured how long they could detect the drug above the threshold that's been set. And then they published that result. This is not a withdrawal time. And the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board, so this is what it looks like. This is an example for flunixin. It gives you the drug, how they did the experiment, and a detection time in hours. The Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board put this paper on their website to help people get a withdrawal time from the detection time. And this is a very complicated paper. This is figure 1 from the paper. And I'm not quite sure who they expected to be able to calculate withdrawal times from the detection time by reading this paper. But I've been doing internal medicine for 30 years, and it took me a long time to read and understand this paper. This is complicated pharmacokinetics. So what are the conclusions of this paper? Well, the sort of take-home message is that if there were 8 or more horses in the study, you should add a 40 or 41% factor. So you take your 144, multiply it by 1.4, and that's the withdrawal time. If there were 8 or fewer horses in the study, you should add 2, you should multiply it by 2 or just over 2 to get the withdrawal time. So your 144 hours, which is 6 days, becomes 12 days. However, this only applies to the dose they used, the frequency they used, and the route they used. And also they published the actual individual formulation they used, and occasionally there are differences there. Not usually, but occasionally there are differences there. And so if you are giving a mg per kg of flunixin, which is about 9 mils for a 450 kilo horse once, then this gives you the detection time, and you can use the calculations I showed you on the previous page to get the withdrawal time. As we'll see later, this actually changes if you start changing any of these parameters. So what could possibly go wrong with this? Well, let's dive in and have a look at when things go wrong, what goes wrong, and how they go wrong. So what we did is we went back through the last 5 years of Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board referrals and appeals, and the last 5 years of judicial panels from the British Horse Racing Authority, and read all the reports where there was a drug positive in the horse, and then tried to categorize what had gone wrong to result in the horse testing positive. There were 109 cases over these 5 years, and this is the way it divided. So over 50% is that the person gave a drug, and then the horse was raced too soon after that drug was given and was still above the testing threshold. In 10% of cases, it was the wrong horse. So someone went to treat the horse and the wrong horse got the treatment. In 14% of cases, it was human contamination. And we're going to dive into some of these and look at the stories behind some of these in a minute. In 8%, it was environmental, and that means it's either from the feed or the environment. And there've been some high-profile cases from the feed recently, and feed contamination can happen. Other includes where it couldn't really be established what happened, or there was a one-off situation that resulted in the horse testing positive, and only 4% were foul play. And I'm going to show you in a minute that that foul play is not always what you think it is. We'll come to that in a bit. But one of the points to make is that of these, only 4% was someone trying to do something wrong. The vast majority are simple mistakes, either with the administration of drugs or with the handling of stable materials, or with the manufacture of feed. What about these too short withdrawals? Well, almost half of them are corticosteroids, and that's really the drug that in these racehorses that is most likely to cause a positive. If we break it down by the kind of drugs they are, so the corticosteroids, 23% of horses tested positive in this 109 tested positive for a corticosteroid, and of those, triamcinolone was the top one. Non-steroidals, that was 9% of horses, and the frequency of positives really reflects the frequency of use. Bute is the most commonly used non-steroidal. It was most commonly positive drug. And then we have flunixin, meloxicam, and those less commonly used drugs. Cobalt, this was in 8% of cases. Mostly this was traced to something that had been given to the animal. A salt lick was blamed for the positive in 3% of cases, and then various supplements and vitamin injections. Immunostimulants, levamisole was the only immunostimulant that tested positive. It is broken down to two performance enhancing drugs, both of which are banned under FEI rules and ARCI rules. Some of these were too short withdrawal. Some of these were the wrong horse got the drug with levamisole. And then other analgesics were 6%, and tramadol was the drug that I put in this category. About half of the tramadol cases were thought to come from a human who was receiving the treatment and then contaminated the animal rather than having been given to the animal itself. So these are the kind of drugs we see in racing. What about FEI? Well, it's similar, but there are some differences. The FEI is a much more diverse organization covering the whole globe, and there is a more diverse range of competitors as well. So we have 40% were using a too short withdrawal. 17% were ignorance of the drug. They simply didn't realize it was not allowed in competition, or they didn't realize that this drug, what the ingredients of the drug were, and there were problems that way. Environmental, perhaps unsurprisingly, is greater than in British and Irish racing, and that is because there's a much more diverse source of feed. People are moving countries and getting feed from different sources, and that can cause problems. 10% the athlete in the tribunal didn't offer an explanation, and then 8% human contamination, 1% wrong horse, and 1% they forgot that they'd given the drug and therefore competed the horse. So let's look at what drugs that involves. In 31% of cases, it was non-steroidals. Again, phenylbutazone is the top dog amongst the non-steroidals. Corticosteroids were number 2. Dexamethasone, which was close behind triamcinolone in racehorses, was the number 1 here. Triamcinolone was number 2. Anabolics, these were much rarer in racing cases, but did occur. And here, boldenone was the most common. There are a couple of preparations where this ended up in ignorance of drugs because the drug contained boldenone, but it wasn't obvious on the label and it was given to the horse. Then we have local anesthetics and sedatives. So let's talk about corticosteroids. And, these are the 2 most common corticosteroids, triamcinolone, dexamethasone. They are given into joints, given as anti-inflammatories, and they help tissue repair, they remove inflammation, they remove pain. And any athlete, golfer, tennis player, runner who gets a joint injection, it's usually going to be a corticosteroid. The problem is that the name is corticosteroid, and anabolic steroids, which are muscle building drugs, also have the name steroids in them. And this is something we need to try and educate the public on. The Paulick report did a fantastic article very recently comparing corticosteroids and anabolic steroids and trying to make their audience understand the difference between the 2. Corticosteroids are anti-inflammatory, anabolic steroids are muscle building. And yet all over social media, when the Kentucky Derby winner Medina Spirit tested positive, I saw this picture of people saying this was Medina Spirit. And yes, it's a funny picture, but it saddened me for our profession because it's clearly a misunderstanding of the drugs. And you can see the difference of the drugs on this screen. The triamcinolone and dexamethasone, I took the pictures myself. They're commonly used drugs. I had to search the internet to get pictures of the other drugs because they're not in any pharmacy that I'm aware of. So how do people get in trouble with corticosteroids? And here's an example of one of the most upstanding members of the training profession, a vet by training, and a fantastic guy who's just retiring, John Ox. At a race in Sligo on the 2nd of July, horse won and tested positive for triamcinolone. It had been treated 21 days previously with triamcinolone. The stand down period for the IHRB for triamcinolone is 14 days. And he was working on this as a withdrawal for triamcinolone. So how did this go wrong? Well, the injection was into the stifle. And we know that from years of pooled experience, we know that there are certain joints where if you inject into them, you're more likely to get a prolonged withdrawal time. This was of quite high consequence. This was the horse's only win to date. It lost 8,850 prize money, and there was an €1,000 fine. So these owners, instead of getting a great day at the races and a little bit of prize money for all their investment in the in the race, they ended up with nothing and a sour taste afterwards. So these are the problems with corticosteroids. This is the result of my experience, other vets' experience, and pooling our knowledge. And these are the areas where you tend to run into trouble. So the whole of, if you inject anything on the spine, the sacroiliac joint, the stifles, the hocks, or the navicular bones, you're likely to run into trouble. So now let's talk about the wrong horse. The most common cause, or the most common drug with the wrong horse, is our friend phenylbutazone. And that seems to be because it's given as a powder and it is put in a feed pot and given to the wrong horse. So the feed pot's given to the wrong horse. And various people have different methods of trying to prevent this. One method is to try and have a different colored feed bowl for medicated feed. The only problem with that is if you're putting all medicated feed in that and not washing it thoroughly between each medication, then you can get carryover and you could possibly put something short-acting in after having put something long-acting in and have a positive, and that has occurred. But you need rigorous ways to identify the horse, make sure that the right horse is getting the right medication, and to distribute the medication effectively to the right horse. This shouldn't be a surprise to us because I'm sure the vast majority of us have unfortunately been in hospital. And this is what you face when you're in hospital, that get asked, what's your name? What's your date of birth? Sometimes you get asked your address and hospital identity number, usually just name and date of birth, before they will give you any medication. And this, obviously we can't ask horses their name and date of birth. So it's a one-way system. It's just us identifying the horse, not the horse identifying itself. And we know these procedures are in place in human hospitals because mistakes happen. So do they happen with horses? Well, we know identity mistakes happen in horses in the most high-profile places. There are many, many reports of the wrong horse turning up to the races, being transported to different countries, etc. And these are high-profile cases where it gets caught. If these cases are happening at the racecourse, just imagine how often this happens at home. New member of staff who doesn't know the horses that well. Member of staff goes out in the dark, catches a horse in a field and treats it. These can happen so easily. Non-steroidals, it's not only bute, but it's mainly bute. It's and again, it happens in the positives really happen in the popularity of the drugs. So in Ireland and the UK, bute would be the most common, then flunixin, then meloxicam, and that's really the order that they happen. One good thing to note is that if you go back further than the 5 years that we did for this study, there were a lot more positives of phenylbutazone and flunixin especially. So we've managed to reduce all of those positives in the last 5 years and really get on top of this problem. So, you know, that's definitely a positive. The wrong drug. Now, these are some stories where people have got into trouble by giving the wrong drug to the horse. Let's go through a couple of them. First off, this is 6% of FEI cases tested positive for diisopropylamine, which is also sold as pangamic acid or vitamin B15. And this can be a real problem. People are fooled by the name vitamin B15. Bottle looks a bit like vitamin B12 or other vitamin preparations. It's called vitamin B15, but unfortunately it's not a vitamin, and it tests positive both under racing rules and FEI rules. Recent cases involved these two preparations, top B15 plus 3, which is a booster for horses, and heptinol, which is supposed to take care of the liver. These positives can have quite far-reaching consequences. One case resulted in a treating vet banned from FEI competitions for 17 months, and they reduced the fine because of her financial circumstances, but still charged her 1,500 Swiss francs. But she lost her job as the team vet for her country because she could no longer travel with the horses to FEI competitions. And this had a marked financial consequence for her. Same drug, different formula, or same name, different formula. This caught out an FEI competitor who, as a favor to the organizers, agreed to compete in Saudi Arabia. The horse had a problem with ulcers and was being treated with mucogel, which is aluminium hydroxide and magnesium hydroxide. Horse travels to Saudi Arabia. The client, the rider, didn't travel yet to there, gets phoned up by his groom. Something happened to the mucogel bottle on the way over. They don't have mucogel. The horse is looking a bit ulcery. Should they buy some mucogel? The rider says yes. In Saudi Arabia, it looks pretty similar. It's called mucogel, but it also contains oxetocane. And there's a metabolite of oxetocane, which is a banned substance and actually an ARCI class 1A drug. So at the top level of banned and fine. And so the rider was not in the country, did not get it, gave verbal authorization to something that they thought was the same drug that the horse got treated with back home, and ended up with an 18-month ban, even though they were out of the country. You've got to be really careful. Here's another example. This is same name, but different formula. Hemo15 is a really commonly used drug in Europe. It's a vitamin and amino acid, typically used if maybe the horse has a slightly low red cell count or needs a bit of a boost, and contains a small bit of cobalt gone by 48 hours. The cobalt is within the vitamin B12. Unfortunately, there's a product also called Hemo15, which is made in the USA by Equimed USA, and that contains pangamic acid and tests positive. According to the FEI tribunal, several Equimed USA products have resulted in the last few years in positive drugs tests. And disturbingly, many of their products have similar names to products we would all be familiar with. For example, there's a Biodill where, compared to Biodill, very subtle differences, and something to really watch out for when you're traveling is different formulas when the name seems very familiar. This is an unfortunate case that resulted in a problem for a trainer in England. They had been giving Coppervit made by FarmSense for a long time because their land was very poor in copper, and they gave it as a supplement to their racehorses. It's intended for sheep and cattle, but you can see it recommended for horses in internet forums. This had all been going well until Coppervit produced a new and improved formula. This new and improved formula also contains cobalt, and it was responsible for a positive cobalt test for a horse that ran in Perth in 2019, because when it said new and improved, they didn't double check the ingredients to check that the new and improved hadn't introduced a substance that is banned. The horse was disqualified and the trainer got a 3,500 fine. Okay, let's move on to the next category. And this is human contamination. This was thought to be the source of the horse's positive test in 8% of FEI cases and 14% of the British and Irish thoroughbred cases. We all know about urinating in the stable. We all know that this has caused positives. It's caused positives for tramadol, it's caused positives for antidepressants, and it's caused positives for illicit drugs such as cocaine. However, not all of these cases are from someone urinating in the stall. This was a particularly difficult case, and the BHA did an amazing job trying to track this one down. Horse tested positive in Yarmouth, beautiful seaside track, for cetrizine, which is an antihistamine. And in the they went on a search for how this cetrizine got into the horse. No cetrizine had ever been prescribed for that horse, for any other horse trained by the trainer, for the trainer himself, or for any members of the trainer's staff. And fair play to the BHA, they kept looking. They found that the stable manager at Great Yarmouth Racecourse was highly allergic, I'm not sure what to, hopefully not horses, and was a heavy user of cetrizine. And it was concluded that the positive in this racehorse resulted from the stable manager. Now, they took a they took a generous view of this, and they waived the fine, but the horse still lost the race. It was never established how the cetrizine got into that box. It was the stable manager. She completely denied, and I think we can believe her that she urinated in the stall, and so it was thought maybe it came from her sweat. Here's another thing that has caught people out, which is not urination. And Rogaine is used to try and restore health, hair growth. It is also modulates blood pressure and therefore is banned in racehorses. So 2 horses from the same trainer tested positive at Kempton Park in February 2018 for minoxidil, which is the active ingredient of Rogaine. Thorough investigation, and the brother-in-law of the trainer helped out at the yard. He used Rogaine in the morning, applied it to his scalp, and didn't always use gloves. He groomed or rode out the 2 horses involved, and it was concluded that he was the source of the minoxidil, the Rogaine, in the horses that tested positive. This was actually quite devastating to this trainer, a small trainer who lost both races and was fined £1,000. So these accidental positives can have quite a profound effect on small trainers. It's also not an isolated case. There was another case of minoxidil within the 5 years of the BHA, and one just before the 5-year period that we did our study. The FEI publishes a great little information on their website about how to minimize the risk of contamination, and I recommend that everyone reads it. It's slightly hidden on their website, unfortunately. You have to go in quite deep to get it. But it is very helpful about how to minimize these random events that lead to horses testing positive. It doesn't mention Rogaine. Let's talk about foul play. And a lot of foul play cases aren't the way you imagine them. Let's take this for an example. This is a case from show jumping where 3 horses all tested positive for acepromazine at an event in August 2017. And these 3 horses belonged to 2 members of the 4-person Hungarian Federation. Someone had seen a person leaving the stall with a syringe in their hand, and further investigation resulted in the allegation or the conclusion that these horses were deliberately doped by the 5th member and therefore first reserve of the Hungarian Federation. So the plan was not to make these horses run faster, but to remove these horses from the team because they tested positive and would be banned, so that this member could get on the Hungarian team. And this kind of sabotage is actually not as rare as it sounds. There were 3 cases in the BHA where a disgruntled associate of the trainer had tried to sabotage them. One example is an anonymous SMS was sent to the BHA saying that a trainer had given a horse something to make it win. It was tested and it was positive for phenylbutazone. It was discovered that a disgruntled jockey had sent both the text and given the bute. And there are 2 other cases where there was deliberate contamination of a horse, in each case with phenylbutazone, and in each case to try and ruin the reputation of the trainer. What can we do about this? Improved security, CCTV cameras. It's the only way to protect against this kind of foul play where someone is deliberately trying to sabotage you. It's got nothing to do with sport. It's got nothing to do with trying to make a horse win, which is the way that the public perceives doping cases in horses, but it's still despicable and needs to be stamped out. And there is the indefensible. So here's a case from the FEI where an endurance horse tested positive for tolfenamic acid, lidocaine, flunixin, phenylbutazone, and diclofenac. And the excuse was that the horse had had an operation, although the rider was unable to specify what operation that this horse had. Perhaps after all those non-steroidals, it maybe needed a kidney transplant, but I don't know. This is despicable. This is clear someone trying to give their horse an edge, or someone trying to do something that's not in the horse's interest. And these kind of cases need to be stamped out. And this rider was given the maximum ban and the maximum fine. It's around 11,000 euros, 12,000 Swiss franc fine for this horse testing positive for these 5 substances. One other thing that happens is a lack of records, and this is present in a number of cases, but is not always the trainer's fault. So in this case, there was water damage. They had had a flood in the yard, and this had damaged their records of treatments given. But the BHA went and looked at the clinical records of the treating practice and these records and found that they did not agree with each other. And this also resulted in a fine for the trainer. So keeping records safe and clear is extremely important. And, you know, this is a disadvantage of the paper system. It's not possible to be completely safe. And what we are trying to do is to move the bar so that it's only extreme outliers who test positive by accident. There's always some strange physiology of the horse or something strange that can cause a horse to not metabolize a drug as expected and go way beyond what we expect for the drug to be still in the system. But most of the time, by eliminating human error, by putting systems in place that reduce the chance of problems, we can move that bar and reduce the number of positive drugs tests. I think it's also important how drugs tests are reported. This came from Inside the Games website, and this, I think, is a responsible way to report the positives that occurred in Tryon in 2018. There were no doping positives, but there were 2 adverse controlled medication findings. And where did they get this? Directly from the FEI press release. I think this is a very responsible way of reporting these adverse findings, because these were 2 corticosteroid cases, 1 dexamethasone, 1 triamcinolone, and they were not attempts to bulk up the horse, give the horse muscle, cheat. They were simple medication errors that occurred, and this is the way they were reported. And these are the things that have made us try and provide tools for vets, for trainers, for competitors to try and avoid doping positives. And I'll talk very briefly through what we're working on to try and show you the way we're going with trying to help people, because it's an incredibly complex situation and it's hard to keep on top. So how can EquiTrace help? Well, our motto is right horse, right drug. Everything is based around positively identifying the horse via its microchip. Once a treatment has been set up for a horse, you get, if you scan the horse's microchip and that treatment is due, it tells you which treatments are due for that horse. You can set up treatment schedules and you identify them by name, drug, stall, list them by name, drug, stall. When you enter a new treatment, it will give you a suggested withdrawal time so that you can decide whether that is an appropriate drug to give at the time that you're entering it based on your competition schedule. And it's also all about easy entry. You can scan the barcode of the drug rather than type. If you start typing, it will start entering, and any drug that you've given to the horse before is listed there. So one touch and you can give it again. This is how it works. Scan the horse's microchip, get told what treatment is due, give it, it's recorded in the blue book automatically at the side of the horse, and you get a warning as to how long not to compete the horse, or a suggestion. And it's just as quick as that. So Match here at DK World Stable has identified the horse, said that the treatment is given, and it's already in the blue book without him having to go and write anything down. We also try and help round these complexities of detection times. Let's go back to flunixin, which we looked at earlier. This detection time is for 1 mg per kg, single dose. There's a paper from 1999 which looked at what happens if you give multiple doses, and they gave 5 doses at 24-hour intervals, either IV or IM to horses. This is looking at the concentration of flunixin in the urine of horses after ceasing these 5 days of treatment. So this is day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 15. The standard screening limit for flunixin in horse urine is 0.1 microgram per mil, and 2 horses at 15 days still had flunixin above this threshold 15 days after this treatment course. So this single dose is really important. And so we try and give you the tools to help you with this. So here, if we add flunixin, if you give it once, we suggest a withdrawal time of 9 days. Give it twice, we suggest a withdrawal time of 10 days. Give it twice daily for 3 days. And based on this data, we suggest a withdrawal time of 18 days. And you do have to be really careful with flunixin if you're giving it multiple days in a row. There are other drugs which do this, and there are some drugs which don't accumulate. It depends on the pharmacokinetics of the drug. Joint injections, we've talked about how joint injections can be a trouble, and this is showing you how we enter joint injections. Simply record the joint you're giving. You can select multiple joints at once, say the amount you're going to give. It's done. And there is the withdrawal time, 10 days for FEI. If you were to have selected a stifle, of be injecting a stifle rather than a fetlock, here under racing rules, we suggest 25 days for a stifle and 14 days for a fetlock. Why do we suggest 25 days for a stifle? Well, based on John Ox's positive at 21 days and other reports of positives that have come out round injections into those larger joints. These are the examples I showed you of the wrong drug. Each of them is in the app with information to try and help you. For example, there's Hemo15. It gives you a suggested withdrawal time, our best guess. It recommends to avoid the product that caused the positives. And it also suggests not to give with other vitamin B or cobalt products because that can cause an accumulation of cobalt and a positive test. We try and help you try and make decisions for the farm and its own circumstances. So if you're a vet, we provide all the information that we based the withdrawal times on within the app with hyperlinks, so you can go and see the exact paper or the competition rules that we base things on. And the intention is that you can then go and set withdrawal times specific to that farm, specific to your knowledge of the circumstances, and you can adjust any withdrawal time as you like. We know horses compete in different countries under different rules, and we have a bunch of different rules pre-programmed in the app to give you a starting point to try and help you find the right competition regulations for your horse. No more writing down, everything's automatically recorded within the app. The app is also about communication, and properly authorized people will see the information and also get advice not to treat the horse or not to enter the horse if the horse has been treated with a drug. People have complete control of their data. All data is encrypted on the phone. It's sent to our server encrypted, so that even though I have all the keys for our website, for the Amazon Web Services where it's kept, it's all gobbledygook to me because it's all ABC 12#3. It's all encrypted by the time it's sent away from the phone. You can choose who you allow to see your data. You can give them full access. You can give them limited access. You can give them access only to see when they scan a horse, what drug it needs, and nothing else. And vets can have more than one farm in the phone and just switch between stable yard or farm as they go along without those farms seeing each other's information. And that's it. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Maybe probably put them in the chat or put your hand up and we'll answer any questions that you have. I really appreciate your time this evening. So I've just been asked how many jurisdictions accept these medical records. At the moment, we've only contacted the IHRB. This is a new product. It's actually launching on the 1st of July, and we plan to contact many more organizations as we go along. And yep, if you are lucky enough to live in the UK or in America or in other countries where you have access to biothermo microchips, every time you scan the horse's microchip, you will also get the horse's temperature, and that will all be graphed out for you. I've also been asked, can I add another chip in the horse, or will that mess things up? We We can't recommend you put a second chip in a horse because they are used for identification of the horse. We have the contract with Goffs for them identifying horses at the sales, and 1% of thoroughbreds already have 2 chips in. So it's something the app can handle. The app can handle up to 3 chips per horse, but it's not something that we can recommend because identity is extremely important. What we need to do is start chipping foals from the start with these biothermal microchips. Are there any other questions that people have? There's one just here. This app is designed for low internet places. Everything is available on the phone. All functions are available on the phone. The only thing that's not available, obviously, if you have low or no internet, is the ability to sync with other people. As soon as you're restored to internet, that syncing will happen and everything will be backed up. And since everything's backed up, it can be transferred to a new phone if you lose your phone, or dunk it in a bucket of water, which I may or may not have done in my life. I've been asked what cost the app is. So the app is on special offer till the end of June next year at €1 per horse per month. Then it will be up to €2 per horse per month in a year's time. As I've been asked, as a vet, how many farms or yards can you be connected with? There isn't a limit. You can be connected to as many farms or yards as authorize you. I've been asked if there is a backup for the data. So yes, the data is encrypted and sent to the cloud. That's the way it's shared. Anytime that you sync the phone, it's backed up to the cloud. That is on Amazon Web Services. There's a node in Ireland, there's a node in Virginia, and there's a node in Australia. And the data is shared between all the nodes. So we did a simulation of a cyber attack where we lost all our data and we were able to restore within 5 minutes. Okay, if there are no other questions, I would like to just thank everyone for coming along. Really appreciate it. Okay, thanks very much.